All right. I think we're started here. Hopefully everyone's in. First of all, I just want to say hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. Let's just start with we'll do quick intros here. I'm Joe. I'm a developer advocate here at CloudQuery, and I have the pleasure to be joined by Mohammed and Keagan. Mohammed is a product leader here at CloudQuery, and Keagan actually is what would you say, AWS partner solutions architect? Is that right?
You hit it on the dot.
Working with a lot of partners, working with people, lots of different companies. So it gets a lot of visibility into like what AWS can do and how people are using AWS. And yeah, Mohammed from Tailwarden, and he's been helping us build out our new platform, which we just launched a couple weeks ago. Yeah, did I miss anything with your intro, Mohammed?
No, I think you're on spot.
Cool, so, awesome. Yeah. Good, we're close here.
Paris.
What's that?
I said I'm based in Paris.
Oh, Paris, yeah, good. Yeah. Very, I know Keagan and I are stuck here in the US. Okay, but today we're going to be talking about strategies, best practices for getting greater visibility into your AWS environments. I actually just want to do a quick poll here before we get started to kind of help get context from where everyone's at. If you're watching the stream right now, you should see a little poll pop up somewhere. I actually don't know how that works if you're on the receiving end of this poll. But I want to know kind of what your level of visibility is into your AWS clouds in particular. Whether you have like no visibility, you have a lot, you're like feeling very happy, in which case, awesome. You probably know more about this than we do. Yep. Okay, perfect. So we're seeing mostly moderate to basic visibility. Like I can see some assets, but we want to see more, but it's mostly in the moderate, which I think is pretty normal, right? Like you have visibility into most of your cloud environments, but you know there's stuff missing, and you probably know that there's more stuff you need to have more control of for whatever reason. All right, cool. Thank you, everyone, for joining that poll. Can I share the results? Is that possible? No. All right. Well, whatever. We'll share that online later on. Great. So today I want to talk about, we're going to have a couple different parts of this. And while we're talking today, feel free to yell, ask any questions. I think we can even upvote questions too if you guys want. So keep an eye on the Q&A. Depending on the question, we'll either jump in right away and answer that question, or we'll save them all for the end and we'll kind of answer those as we go through. But don't be afraid to ask us questions. We're going to be starting today with Keagan talking about AWS governance best practices. He's going to be talking about some of the existing tools and best practices there are for managing AWS environments at large scale. And then we'll be kicking it off over Mohammed, and he'll be talking about more practical use cases for managing and governing your AWS workloads. We're going to be focusing primarily around three sectors, which is going to be security, compliance, and FinOps, and saving money and kind of keeping an eye on cloud costs. And then we'll wrap up with a Q&A at the end. Pretty simple. I think we got about an hour today. We'll see if we use it. And yeah, okay, cool. Keagan, should we kick it over to you? Should we?
Yeah.
Let's see here.
Awesome. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen. Can you let me know when that's visible?
Yeah, we'll yell.
Awesome.
Yep, you're good.
Great. Well, thanks, Joe, for the introduction. Thanks for having me today on this webinar. Today, I'm going to be talking, like you said, about cloud governance, particularly with AWS and some of the best practices that we recommend. I know you gave a brief introduction, but I'll just go a little bit more. My name is Keagan Mirazee. I'm a partner solutions architect here at AWS. On my team, I really focus on discovering, developing, and delivering solutions with partners. So whether that's co-marketing, co-selling, or co-building, I get insights towards what partners want to develop given the market industry. And I assist them with their primary pain points in the cloud infrastructure. I'm a U of I alum, so hail to the orange if anyone is
shout out.
Had to throw that in there. And yeah, I'm super stoked to be here today. I've been working with Joe and Mohammed for a few months now with other people on the CloudQuery team, and I've been really looking forward to this opportunity. So thanks again, Joe and Mohammed.
Yeah, no, thank you for being here. We're the ones that we're honored. We're the ones that are humbled that you're here with us today.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that, we have these opportunities to talk and also collaborate and have discussions about kind of best practices and in cloud governance, given how important it is.
Keagan, I thought you were going to break down into Ice Baby to stop, collaborate, and listen. Yours is better.
I love it. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. want to give like a little agenda within the agenda. So I'll be talking a little bit about an overview of what cloud governance is. We'll be rolling into some of the best practices. So I've just picked 4 best practices that we recommend and kind of give some examples, some analogies, some ways to think about cloud governance aside from just like names of services and just utilities of different applications. And then I'll just conclude with some like key takeaways, but feel free to interrupt with questions. Super happy to talk about them and kind of make this more of a discussion. One thing I want to start with is just kind of a message that we like to share with all of our partners and just something that I think is kind of key between AWS and CloudQuery, which is that strong cloud governance is really at the heart of every successful cloud journey. Whether that is, a startup, whether that's, you're just making an AWS account and you want to just create an application, or whether that's, you're a seasoned enterprise, that has hundreds and hundreds of accounts on AWS. Having strong cloud governance is really the key to success. And I'll be trying to, convey this message throughout the presentation to show that cloud governance is not just about meeting a compliance regulation. It's not just about making sure that you're not going over budget, but it's really the key turning point towards innovating at your company. It's in innovating in the tech landscapes. It's really a message that I think resonates with both CloudQuery and AWS, and I think it fits really well into kind of the definition of cloud governance, which is essentially a set of rules, practices, and reports that help align your cloud use to your business objectives. So whether that is your development team, having a strict budget on how much they can use for a proof of concept, or whether that's, giving your security team insights into what vulnerabilities you may have along your entire infrastructure. It's really aligning your cloud usage, no matter how you're using the cloud, to your business objectives, whether that be cost, security, FinOps, as you mentioned, Joe. So really, cloud governance is really kind of the core of having an innovative company, of having a secure company. And it's really a strong message and key characteristics of your cloud environment that should be taken to note, no matter kind of what your role is. So this brings the question, okay, so when do you need cloud governance? If you want to use it like in every single role, you want to use it in every single organization within your company, like when do you really need it? So I want to break down like 2 specific examples of when and where you need cloud governance. The first is migrations, new projects, organization transitions. So this is a quote from the director of FactSet, customer and partner of AWS. And with their use of AWS organizations, they were able to accelerate project onboarding to the cloud by 5 times. So this is pretty significant. And it kind of shows how AWS organizations as a service is fundamental for any enterprise scale journey. So from a practical standpoint, when you're planning projects or when you're planning a migration, whether it just be kind of like a lift and shift or lift, tinker and shift, or you're just kind of entirely migrating to the cloud from on-premise, you want to be able to set that up in a very structured and visible way. With organizations, you're able to set up specific controls like SCPs, which are security control policies. You're able to manage costs through consolidated billing, and you're able to kind of set up accounts in a standardized process with Control Tower, which we'll get into later. But essentially, AWS organizations allows you to accelerate your migrations, your new projects, and your organization transitions, which, whether that be adding more people to your company, whether that be kind of thinning down and removing people from specific teams, you want to be able to do this in a repeatable and structured way, which is kind of outlined here with this quote from FactSet. Another kind of example I want to talk about is when you need cloud governance, whether that's regulatory frameworks like, HIPAA or SOC compliance or ISO compliance, right? Whether it be corporate standards like specific security measures that your company is setting for itself to be secure from different security threats, or whether it be data residency requirements, if you're giving a promise to your customers about the security of their data. That's going to be another really strong use case for cloud governance. So in this quote by Bristol Myers Squibb, executive director, mentioned that they were able to use AWS Control Tower, to programmatically set up guardrails and data controls in order to meet this ever-changing requirements and regulations. And it's really important here because when we're dealing with regulatory frameworks, we want to make sure that, we're constantly following those new frameworks, even though we have many people who are, deploying new accounts, who are accessing data. So being able to programmatically set up guardrails and data controls is extremely important when we're dealing with any kind of compliance questions or compliance controls themselves. Those are like some use cases or some kind of questions in which cloud governance is really pertinent, or when it comes up to the front of our intention. But it really, as I mentioned before, kind of is the foundation for innovating on AWS. So before we get into like best practices or kind of use cases where we get into detail, I want to just describe this, which is cloud governance at scale. How does it lead to direct accelerating innovation? And on the left-hand side of the screen, we can see kind of the journey in 3 steps. So by improving our security, compliance, and visibility standards, we kind of lay a solid foundation to make sure that we have the right visibility, that we're compliant, and that we're preventing security threats. But this stability is what directly enables our organization to be more nimble, whether that is creating multiple accounts for proof of concepts, or whether that's isolating developer accounts from security accounts or networking accounts, right? We're able to be more agile when we want to start new projects, when we want to start new migrations, when we want to innovate. And that directly leads to this phrase that we have at AWS, which is we like to fail fast. And this is not really specific to AWS, but it's really specific to innovation, where if we're not afraid of screwing up a test environment, or going way over budget, we're able to really innovate faster because we have those boundaries in place. We have safeguards to really experiment and to fail and to try new things. So this is kind of like a visual of what I like to express as how important cloud governance is, and especially as you want to scale up and you have more people, you have more organizational units themselves. So that kind of does it for me, and it is a good illustration of how we should view cloud governance in a whole across a cloud environment. So yeah, let's get into actually some of these best practices. And this is what I find really interesting when you're managing an enterprise cloud environment, or you're kind of starting a new one. So they're always something that you can learn about how you set them up and how you manage them. And the first best practice I really look at is to use accounts as building blocks. So the analogy that I like to use is imagine you're constructing a secure building, right? You can think of AWS accounts like building blocks. So each account can be seen as like a brick, and the resources can be like the type of material you're using. So whether that's like wood, whether that's insulation, whether that's concrete for the foundation, you want to build and use multiple different accounts for different purposes in order to scale appropriately and to scale in the right direction, whether that be in terms of compliance or isolation or security reasons. So by being able to know we need to build a new security application, let's isolate these security accounts for that purpose. Or we need to add this new development team, let's make sure that we have a budget, or we have boundaries and permissions for those. Really should use and think about accounts as having individual tasks, or you can kind of think about it as multiple independent building blocks that kind of work together to create a secure infrastructure. So we shouldn't look at accounts as having multiple purposes, or having really extending permissions as is kind of a given, but we should really see them as coming together for a bigger structure, a bigger purpose. An illustration I really like is this slide here, where we can look at organizational units, or how we like to call them, just OUs within an organization. So we like to think of them in 2 separate ways, right? So we have foundational organizational units, and we have additional OUs. This isn't like the holy grail of how we recommend organizational units or organizations to be set up. It's rather just an example, but foundational OUs kind of represent, for example, like a security OU, where we want to isolate specific accounts. We want to isolate specific users, people in our company that have access to log archives. And we want specific people in our company or specific people in our organization to have, read-only access, to be able to, prevent or adjust different resources depending on the different security implications they may have. And then likewise, we can have an infrastructure OU, which has dedicated accounts, dedicated applications for networking or for shared services. So by isolating these 2 accounts, or by isolating these 2 organizational units, we can define boundaries for permissions on security. We'll only be able to read different logs, while the infrastructure would be able to adjust different networking permissions or to, share different services or different resources amongst different accounts on different teams. So really by having this division in accounts in organization per team, we're able to divide and isolate and identify which organizations are doing what and what processes or what tasks need to be carried out by specific teams. So this is really important at scale, is what we like to emphasize, which is as your company grows, as your operations in the cloud increase, we want to be able to still be compliant, still be secure, still manage our budgets while we're doing this. And this kind of leads on to the additional OUs. So for example, you can have like a sandbox organizational unit where you allow developers to build proof of concepts or to kind of build new applications without having the worry of, for instance, racking up spending for a specific service or removing the vulnerability of connectivity to the network, right? So in a sandbox organizational unit, you may use AWS budgets to set specific spending limits on accounts. You may disconnect them from the network, as I mentioned. You may kind of only give them access to like CloudFormation, to Amazon S3, to Lambda, to Amazon SageMaker, right? Because you want to limit the potential for security threats, for financial overspending, et cetera. And then finally, we have workload OUs. So workload OUs can literally, they can be however you want to set them up. But in this example, it's for dev, pre-production and production events where we're setting specific controls to kind of limit the potential for accidentally stopping an EC2 instance or accidentally spinning up way too many RDS read replicas. It could be anything, but in this case we can identify different organizational units for different purposes, and it allows us to scale at a proper pace. Any questions about this topic before we move on to kind of like the next best practice?
No. This is good. I think it's such a great step to like break this down too. Yeah, that's a granular control, least permissions, right? Nope, this is great. And yeah, if anyone in the chat has any questions, let us know. We'll be addressing these during the talk.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. So yeah, making sure that you build your account in a way that's scalable, in a way that's easily viewed is super important, but it's more than just that, right? We don't want to just build our accounts in the right formation. We don't want to just build our organizational units in a way that we can just scale up. Another really key factor is enabling visibility, to be able to track to see, okay, what are these accounts doing? Can we track them? Can we identify like spending to a specific user, and how do we constrict that, for example? And that comes to the next best practice, which is enabling visibility to track user activity and risk overall across your environment. So this is a really important best practice, and it really comes down to centralized logging in a multi-account environment. So by using services like AWS Organizations, AWS Config, and AWS CloudTrail, we're able to get a complete visibility across all accounts, which ensures that really nothing goes unnoticed. Whether it's a specific account with way too many API calls, or whether it's, as I mentioned, a specific user who's racking up a ton of spending with a specific service, we want to be able to identify and rely on those metrics that we pull. Having this increased visibility allows us to ensure that our actions are immutable and traceable. And that essentially just means that we can trust what our logs are saying. We don't want to just be able to view them, but we want to be able to trust that, okay, this is accurate, this is dependable for this specific reason. And finally, integrity validation guarantees that our data remains accurate and reliable. So with AWS Organizations, Config, and CloudTrail, we're able to use these services in tandem to make this possible. And I think this is a really key moment for CloudQuery and CloudQuery's key use case, which, although these services are extremely robust and go into really minute granular detail about specific usages and specific metrics, we find that a lot of customers and partners find it difficult to really have like a centralized view of more than just one specific service here. So I think I'll let Mohammed talk and Joe talk about this, but really these services give the insight, but we really can take advantage of partners like CloudQuery to kind of get centralized views, to get queryable insights into what these services are providing us based on our account. So even though they do give us granular permissions, some points that partners like CloudQuery help with is giving like a whole dashboard for this that is managed and is able to be viewed. But that's really the second best practice here, which is being able to track user activity and be able to evaluate risks on a higher scale than just on an account by account basis. There's a QR code in the center of the screen here, which is a blog post about CloudTrail Lake, which you can think of as kind of like a more high level view of all the CloudTrail logs that your account or your organization may face. So it's a really cool read. I would definitely check it out for some more detail and some more insights into CloudTrail Lake and different kind of high level logging archiving abilities.
Get that in the chat too.
Awesome. Yeah. So that brings us to the third best practice, which is going to be automating account provisioning and customization. So as I mentioned in one of the previous slides, being able to automate account provisioning is extremely important when you're dealing with certain compliance regulations, right? So if you have like HIPAA compliance measures or you have SOC or ISO compliance, you want to make sure that every account follows those regulations and kind of follows those compliance practices so that you don't open yourself up to risks where data gets into an account that's not compliant. And there's a ton of services at AWS that allow that to happen, the primary being AWS Control Tower. So there are four main pillars here, right? Standardization, consistency, self-service, and domain-specific environments. I'll briefly go over each one. So standardization is being able to make sure that you have a standard deployment where you have consistency and uniformity within the abilities of each account. Second is obviously consistency, which is self-explanatory, but being able to replicate accounts and being able to replicate provisioning of accounts in a way that doesn't change on a case-by-case basis or an account-by-account basis. Next, we want self-service, right? We want business leaders to be able to have insights into their cloud environments without having, an insane amount of, training or expertise on what the cloud is. We want to be able to have a self-service, easy understanding of how their accounts are operating, how accounts are being created in a way that doesn't require very specific, background knowledge or extensive training. And then finally, we want domain-specific environments. So we don't want, one account to have to deal with different environment regulations or different compliance practices. We want to be able to separate those based on accounts themselves. So on the left-hand side, we see like the three main services that I want to highlight here. Starting with Service Catalog, this is where your organization can publish pre-approved CloudFormation templates. So infrastructure as code, essentially, that's approved by your management, that's approved by your development teams, and can be limited based on user for which application they can install. So for example, like if a security team needs to be able to download a security application, but you don't want the developers to be able to download that, you can set specific security control policies, and you can set specific IAM policies themselves to restrict which people on the team can download which softwares. And then we could deploy them in a repeatable way across all the new accounts or multiple accounts at once. AWS CloudFormation, as I just briefly mentioned, is your infrastructure as code foundation. So if you want to define your entire AWS infrastructure in a template, you can define the launch of a single EC2 instance in a predetermined way. So you can define, okay, I want to use like a T2 instance with this much memory, this much storage. And it can also kind of scale up to a complex multi-tier application that's all defined within one file. You submit that one file to CloudFormation, and you can just sit back as it's just completely managing the deployment of those resources. And lastly, we have Control Tower, which I mentioned, which is your automated landing zone for account facilitation. So it sets up multi-account environments using AWS organization best practices. And it can implement specific guardrails, and that's done with SCPs and AWS config rules to provide a dashboard for centralized governance. So it's what you use to automate compliant account creation, as I mentioned before. So if you need to make sure that your accounts are HIPAA compliant, or you need to make sure that your accounts are SOC compliant, you can create custom rules within Control Tower and then implement those rules across all your accounts to make sure that you don't have an existing account that's breaching specific compliance or security protocols, and it can make sure that the accounts that you deploy in the future are coming clean with all the requirements set in place as a whole. So the typical is you use Control Tower to establish your foundation, to set your requirements, to set your compliance standards. You use CloudFormation to define your infrastructure, to define what services you're going to be deploying, what applications you're going to need. And then Service Catalog makes those templates essentially available to the users based on your discretion to your entire account. So I know I spoke a lot about, scaling and automated account provisioning. It's not the most, bright topic, but it really comes to the core of setting that foundation, right?
Yeah.
So that we can be able to experiment, so we can be able to innovate without having that fear of breaking compliance or, breaching security, et cetera.
No, you nailed it. That's exactly it. I know it's not the most glamorous part about it, but like it's so important, especially if you're getting to that like inflection point or like you're growing your cloud environments to these massive levels. You want to make sure that like you're got some guardrails around it. This is great. I love it. And thanks for sharing some of the tools you can use on there too and what they do. I think that's super helpful and kind of like foundational info about AWS accounts. I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really comes with the biggest impact when you're dealing with these like large enterprise accounts that have like hundreds to thousands of accounts that they manage, or maybe it's a company that has kind of like whether it's a partner hosted solution, whether it's going to be run and deployed by a specific partner company, and the customer is going to access it through the partner's account, or whether it's the other way around, where the customer is deploying the application and the actual company is providing controls on it, and the company is actually going to be managing those accounts. It really comes to use in every single application or every single company that's running on the cloud. And in addition, it's also really important for smaller companies as well, because you never know when your company is just going to take off, or you're going to need to add more people to your teams, or you're going to have more insight into specific services. A lot of the times, even smaller companies come to us and they're like, wow, like I all of a sudden got 30 million requests on my API gateway. Like, what am I supposed to do here? And it's like, you can use some of our managed services, our compliance services, to set controls on those services to, prevent that from happening again. So really, small to large, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
we really want to push cloud governance as a really important trait of your cloud, no matter what the size is. So yeah, that's a great call out. Awesome. So kind of wrapping up, going into the last best practice that I want to share with y'all, which is the principle of least privilege. I know this is like a term that was new to me when I joined AWS, but essentially it has an impact on, as I mentioned, small to large accounts or small to large organizations or companies. And essentially what this means is we want to always assume the least level of privileges for a specific role, for a specific user, or a specific account. We never want to define or overuse specific permissions for any account. We always want to start off with a deny all, for a new user or a new role. We don't want to kind of start with an allow all strategy, right? So depending on whatever that account, whatever that user, whatever that role needs, we want to start from essentially a deny all list and add permissions on as needed. And this kind of scales to not just a specific user, a specific policy, but it kind of rolls up into user groups. It comes into organizations, and even beyond that with the root level account, kind of identifying and only allowing the necessary permissions when they're needed in order to kind of prevent the worst case scenario from happening. So what key principles am I going to push for here is going to be, first, to restrict access to the management account. So if whether you're a partner at AWS or whether you're a customer, specifically if you're a partner, we want to make sure that you follow best practices when creating an application. And this really applies to any kind of application. And that's restricting access to the management account. Making sure that the management account doesn't have regular tasks that other lesser permission accounts can carry out. As I mentioned, second, balance least privilege access with business agility. So you don't want to really only minimize like specific tasks for specific accounts. You want to make sure that you still have agility in a sense where higher levels have more permissions and lower levels have least, so that if you need a higher level to step in, they're going to be able to resolve the blocker, to terminate a resource, to increase a budget if necessary, right? But at the same time, we want to make sure that an entry-level developer isn't able to terminate EC2 instances. So it's really important to be able to understand how we can balance least privileges with business agility and kind of use that as a structure on an everyday basis. So an example that I like to talk about is I see after like viewing and working with partners on their different solutions and their different permissions specifically, I see that companies think of IAM policies, or they think of Identity Access Manager or IAM Identity Center as kind of like a one-time setup where, hey, we're going to create an admin, we're going to create a developer role, and we're going to create like a test user role, right? But a lot of times this thought process kind of overlooks the fact that privileges should change, and we should always be accessing and analyzing what permission specific services have, what permission specific users have. So there's kind of a relatively new feature of IAM Identity Center, which is called IAM Access Analyzer. And we're able to, scan our account to see what permissions or what overall spread or reach does a specific account or does a specific user have. And we're able to adjust it based on that scan. So one thing that I'd like to push for is that we should constantly be looking at our IAM policies. We should constantly be looking at our security control policies to make sure that, let's say something in the organization has changed, management has changed, developers have changed. We want to constantly look to make sure that one account doesn't have permissions that it shouldn't have.
I love that. Also, we're about halfway through, but I do want to just put a pin in, or like a explanation point on that, underline, because I totally agree. Like your infrastructure, your cloud governance, like policies change, new regulations drop. Like it's always a constant shifting target of like what your cloud infrastructure looks like and how you specifically need to govern that. Should be constantly kind of reappraised. So thanks for pointing that out.
Yeah, and I'll just go ahead and kind of wrap this up here too, just so we have time for the CloudQuery portion. But yeah, all of these services, all of these compliance should always be constantly looked at, as you mentioned, Joe.
Yep.
And I guess we can kind of just look at the key takeaways here. So from these kind of 4 best practices we can look at is we want to think of our accounts as building blocks, especially when we scale up. While we do this, we want to enable visibility to track our user activity. We want to be able to track what users are doing what, and we want to be able to trust what our logs are telling us for the purpose of our teams. While we're doing this, we want to automate account provisioning and customization. And while we're doing that, we want to make sure that we apply this principle of least privilege. And, I think these 4 best practices are really important, no matter the scale, as I mentioned, but it comes down to, it really kind of turns into kind of why we have CloudQuery, because even though we have these services that are able to really go into a granular view, it's sometimes difficult to manage them from one place. You have to understand what specific services do, how to set specific permissions, what the differences are between specific AWS services, and et cetera, while managing your infrastructure at the same time. So I think this is a great turning of the page to CloudQuery, where we have these services available on AWS, but it really comes down to how you use them and how you're able to, search through them in order to effectively manage your cloud. So I just wanted to say thanks everyone for, listening and taking in, these slides. I'm really happy to answer any questions on email after this conversation or just on the chat here. And you can kind of see my socials on LinkedIn as well as my email for any additional questions. But thank you again. Really appreciate it. And I'd like to hand it off back to you, Joe and Mohammed.
Cool. That was awesome. Thanks, man. Yeah. And if anyone has any questions for us or whatever, we can get those forwarded on to, we'd love to get you connected or get any questions you have answered. And if we don't know, or Keagan doesn't know, we'll find someone who knows. But that was great. Thank you for walking us through that. And you're right. That was a great transition over to us. Reminder, Q&A is open. Comments are open. Drop us a yell if you want us to dig into anything a little bit deeper or whatever. Otherwise, without further ado, I'll turn it over to Mohammed. And Mohammed, if you want to share your screen. Cool. Nice. We can see it.
Okay. Great. Awesome. So again, thanks Keegan for joining us and sharing all those best practices. As you mentioned, like AWS lays a good foundation for cloud governance, either through the frameworks, best practices, but also the native services they are offering. Like how to scale those cloud governance practices can be challenging, especially for organizations that have hundreds or thousands of accounts, like how they can make sure that those practices are visible, measurable, enforceable across their cloud environments. And that's basically where CloudQuery comes in. So CloudQuery basically bridges the gap between AWS recommended governance frameworks and the day-to-day operational insights you need. So it gives you like the visibility that you need. As you know, you cannot govern what you cannot see. So this is something like CloudQuery solves by giving you a source of truth or a single source of truth of all your assets and all like your cloud resources, but also your entire cloud footprint. So you can have in one single place all your assets, so you don't have to juggle between different tools, different like browser tabs, spreadsheets. So you have just one queryable platform that allows you to build governance at scale, have like visibility on cost, security, and compliance. And this is simply done with plain SQL, which I'm gonna showcase in a few during the demo. So you don't have to, as I mentioned, like spend a lot of time like figuring out where your resources are located, who's like created those resources, like who is the owner, on which cloud account, and which cloud region. And again, it becomes worse when you are on a multi-cloud setup. So you can, with the platform, identify like untagged resources, idle resources, or even compliance issues. And this works by syncing your AWS environment. So we support not only AWS, but also the other cloud providers, including GCP and Azure, but also container orchestration platforms like Kubernetes, and also security tools, developer tools. And as a result, we are able to build a unified asset inventory, and we take care of the heavy lifting like normalization of data, the categorization of resources, handling the cloud providers, API rate limiting, data freshness, sync frequency. And as a result, we can offer you a single pane of glass, which allows you like to search for your assets through our search engine. You can write queries, you can build reports and policies, which will allow you to uncover additional insight, for instance, detecting misconfigurations or no compliant resources. You can also identify cost saving opportunities, like for instance, by mapping the cloud spend and the usage to the right team, to the right cost unit or cost center. You can also, and this is really important, and to go back to what Keegan shared, is having that visibility back, especially to engineers or to application teams. As you know, like their focus is on building more value to the business by building features. And today they don't want to like juggle between different point solutions, CSPMs, and different like cloud consoles to find the right information. So we provide that unified view where they can see everything. And as a result, like security, cost, and compliance can be considered earlier in the development process and not like later when things goes wrong. So, and we see that happening a lot with CloudQuery, as we have a couple of customers doing that already by building what we call like cloud center of excellence, and by building like cloud portals and developers portals that they offer to their engineers so that they can have that visibility on cost, security, and compliance. And as a result, they can have like accountability to cloud spending, because now they have that visibility. They can also have that control on what's happening on the infrastructure. So with that being said, let me jump to the demo, because I love showing things versus like talking. So let me show you like how this works in real world. So this is like CloudQuery. So this is the unified asset inventory. As you can see, you have resources coming from different accounts. As I said earlier, we do already the normalization and categorization. So here I have compute instances coming from different cloud providers. And as a result, I can start like using filters to uncover additional insights. And a starting point, or as a typical example, is tags. As you know, like tags are really key to cloud governance, because you cannot like control what you don't like see, and you don't see what you don't tag. So you need to make sure that your resources are properly tagged. And an example of like some use cases on how you can leverage CloudQuery for cloud governance is, for instance, to identify resources that are untagged. And this is really key, like to have this kind of tags audit that will allow you really to have a state of your infrastructure when it comes to tagging, can really reveal a lot of like insights and a lot of like consistencies when it comes to tagging. And the powerful thing, as I mentioned, since it's like supporting other cloud providers and integrations, so you can have everything in one place. So as you can see here, I have pods running on Kubernetes clusters also on one single place. So I can see like the resources that are not tagged on the infrastructure side, but also at the application side when it comes to Kubernetes clusters or Kubernetes pods. And you can take this also further by using the resources metadata field, which can be really powerful because it allows you really to uncover more advanced insights. So I will take an example of S3 buckets. So here I'm gonna look for all the S3 buckets that are created across my different organizations. And as you can see here on one click, I have all the S3 buckets across the different AWS accounts. And if I click on a specific resource, I see the metadata, so I can find more information. And the good thing is I can use those metadata field also as additional features. So here for the S3 buckets, I have policy status, which is like a field that I can use to find out if a S3 bucket is publicly exposed or not, because I can see if there is an IAM policy assigned to that bucket. So I can add an additional filter and see if I have any S3 bucket that are publicly exposed. Like I don't have no publicly exposed S3 bucket, which is a good thing. We are doing good in terms of security. But the good thing is you can also save those results as a custom view. And custom views are pretty dynamic, so it allows you really to have more visibility, and especially giving that visibility to your engineers, security, FinOps, and other teams that works together with governance teams. So you can create like segmentation of your infrastructure that matches the way you work at the organization level. So you can have custom views for teams, projects, application, business units, cost centers, and you can track and proactively track what matters to you. So you can have cost, security, and compliance in one place, no matter like the scale of your infrastructure. So this is like for the unified asset inventory. But we don't stop here because we want also to give you the flexibility to also write your own, like, I would say, queries to uncover advanced insights. And that's where the SQL console can be really helpful. And within this feature, you can write queries and you can join like different data sources and add more context so that you can uncover more like important like information about your infrastructure. And to help you get started, we have like pre-built queries, which basically are a library of queries that we maintain. So those queries answers most of the questions that governance teams need to get to like or answer on day-to-day basis. So you have queries on FinOps, cost, governance, and compliance. So to keep it practical, I will show you a couple of examples. So for instance, if you are interested in security and compliance, and let's say you are preparing for a security audit and you want to gather evidence for an upcoming SOC 2 certificates. So here you have a couple of queries that you can use to help with this like evidence gathering. So here is an example of that. So this is a query which basically, as the name indicates, it's going to like list all the EC2 instances that you have across your different AWS accounts that are using a security group, which allows SSH from anywhere. And as you know, like this is not like a good security practice. Like if you have like security roles that have like an open port on sensitive like ports, you want to make sure that only a specific IP address is whitelisted, or worst case scenario, a CIDR range. So with this simple query, you have all the instances that need to be remediated to make sure that they are following the best practices. Another example is when it comes to SSL certificates. So this is another query which allows you to list all the SSL certificates that expired or are going to be expired in the upcoming days. So you need to keep an eye on them. So that's by turning them to a custom view so you can proactively monitor them and make sure your SSL certificates are enabled. And speaking of like the less privileged principles, we also have queries that you can use also to evaluate your IAM roles and identify IAM roles that are not following the less privileged principle. Like for instance, if they are using like open wildcard, this is an example of a query you can write. We have also queries, for instance, for IAM users. So you want to give your development team access to AWS, which is great so that they can provision and they can like build things, but you want to make sure also best practices are being followed. So for instance, if they have access to the AWS console, you want to make sure that the MFA is enabled. So this is an example of a query that you can write, and it will like list all the IAM users that didn't have the MFA enabled yet. And to jump to another use case, because as I mentioned, like cloud governance is not only about security and compliance. It's not only about like making sure that your resources are secure and compliant, but also how you can manage effectively the cloud. So FinOps and cost optimization, cost visibility is really important. So we also like provide that information also out of the box. So we also have queries about that. So a typical example is like EC2 Graviton instances. As you know, like AWS recommends using Graviton as for instance types because they are cheaper. So you want to leverage them as much as you can. And this is like a simple query that lists all the EC2 instances that are running on your cloud environments that are not like using Graviton instance type. So that could be an opportunity to upgrade to an alternative instance type that is using the CPU as Graviton, which that way you can reduce your cost. Another example is the low hanging fruits, which are basically the cost saving opportunities that leads companies to waste a lot of money, which are like, for instance, having idle resources or resources that are not like used anymore, but they are out there and no one knows about them. And an example of that are EBS volumes. So here we have a query that's like lists all the EBS volumes that are like there that are not attached to any instance. So it's great that you have like volumes and you can have like backups and everything, but you want to make sure that this is something that's like is being used. And if it's not being used, maybe you can archive it and move it to history so you can save costs. And the power of CloudQuery is not like to rely only on the asset inventory. As I mentioned earlier, you can like join other data sources because it's great. I have here a saving opportunity, but I don't know if that's something that worth my time to do or not. So I want to also have the cost visibility on top of that to see, for instance, how much I'm going to save like on terms of like money. If like, for instance, I take this action of cleaning up the EBS volumes. So this is how you can like use like CloudQuery to join queries and to have that information from the different data sources. So here I have written a query before this demo, which like uses the asset inventory and uses like the list of EBS volumes that are not attached. And then it uses also another data source, which is cost and user reports on AWS, which like provide like the billing data points. So I'm joining both the inventory data and the cost data, like to take a decision. So here I have the amount of money I can save by deleting those EBS volumes. So I have $40 I can save, which is not great because it's just a small demo environment, but in reality, this can cost you thousands of dollars. So this is like an example of how CloudQuery can be really like powerful, where you can like not only rely on the asset inventory and the visibility that CloudQuery gives you, but also enrich that visibility with external data sources. Could be on FinOps, it could be on CSPM, your also like CMDB or other data sources so that you can take the right decisions and prioritize that based on the size of the opportunity. Go ahead.
Sorry to jump in here. I just really like this functionality of CloudQuery. I just wanted to ask, because it seems like the pre-saved queries are very useful for general use cases. You also kind of showed here that you can create custom queries. I guess my question is like, what are the prerequisites for someone in my company to be able to write their own query, depending on whatever the use case is? What would I need to know in order to write my own query, and what are the steps to carry that out and save them?
So like the queries can be like written in plain SQL. So anyone who knows SQL can write the queries. Of course, here we provide like the different like tables and table structure and different like fields that might be like helpful for you to write the queries. Like, but also we also provide like those pre-built queries so that can help you get started. So, and also we have the unified asset inventory, which is kind of like a UI based like an inventory. So for those that are not like really familiar with plain SQL and want just to and they just want like to have insight after the box, that's something they can get. But still, like you can also like, as I mentioned, right, custom queries based on your needs, and you can customize also those pre-built queries. And then an example of that is here I have a query about like governance, and especially for tags, because I want to go back again to tags because they are really key when it comes to governance. So here I have a pre-built query that we provide that will like checks like all the cloud resources across different cloud environments that you have, and checks if they have this like tag keys, like have cost center owner environment. And again, cost center owner environments this can be a requirement for certain organizations. It might not be the case for others. And also the naming conventions might change. Sometimes they use uppercase, lowercase, a shorter version. So you can customize that. You have the possibility to customize that based on your needs. But the idea is really like you can write, as you can see here, queries that allows you really to uncover insights on different areas. It could be cost, could be governance, it could be security, it could be compliance. And just to double down on that is, even if you don't know how to write queries, we also provide reports. And reports are basically a way to visualize those answers to the key questions that you might have. So basically, we have also out of the box reports, and those reports, as I mentioned, can help you really evaluate your cloud infrastructure against the different governance best practices. I've been talking about the AWS Well-Architected framework earlier. So we have also reports that's going to evaluate your cloud infrastructure against, and behind the scene, those are queries. It's just we are making them like easy to use, and also for non-technical user, and especially for engineers and people that don't have enough knowledge of the infrastructure. So they can for instance, have that sense of visibility and control without spending a lot of time figuring out how the different services are working and what are the queries I need to write. So here we have reports about the AWS Well-Architected framework. We also have reports on taggings. This can help you also start getting control of your tags strategy. So this is an example of a widget you could use, for instance, which gives you the tags distribution across your cloud environments. So it shows you all the tag keys, values like distribution, and you can see if there is any naming convention issues, or if you have any tag key which is underutilized that you want to double down in. You also have cost-saving opportunities. So this is, again, a multi-cloud cost-saving opportunity. So it also includes the low-hanging fruit, like unattached disks or elastic IPs and others. But also you can also have visual widgets about other criteria that can help you identifying cost-saving opportunities. An example of that is CloudWatch metrics. So you can also collect CloudWatch metrics and write a query that's going to list all the EC2 instances that have a low traffic or low CPU utilization for the last 7 days. And that could be a good target for optimization. So this is something also you can do, and you can build a report for that. And finally, you can also have reports for containers asset tracking. We know Kubernetes is pretty popular. And as I mentioned earlier, we want to give you the visibility also at the application level, so that you can have within a single view what is running on Kubernetes when it comes to pods, but also what running at the infrastructure level. So for instance, a backend team, they can have the pods that belong to their namespace, but they can also see the different AWS resources that are using to deploy those pods, like queues or SNS topics or whatever they are using to build their application. So that way they can have that visibility in one place. To take things further, because it's great to have reports, it's great to have queries, but you want to make sure that those queries are running so you can proactively monitor your infrastructure so that you can move from reactive to proactive cloud governance. We have policies, and policies basically allows you really to turn those queries to rules that you can run on a specific schedule, and that way you can identify issues before they become a trouble. And most of the time you can use I would say the security standards like AWS Foundational Security, AWS Benchmark, or even security or official security and compliance certification like SOC 2, NIST, PCI DSS, and others. But you can also write your own queries and make it a policy so that it's specific to your organization. And as a result, you can track all the resources that are not compliant. And again, everything I showed so far can be done via the API. So CloudQuery is API driven because we want you also to integrate CloudQuery with your own governance stack. We know that governance teams, they have FinOps tools, they have CSPM, they have CMDBs. So, and we want to fill that gaps that they have with those tools so that you can bring that visibility into one place and start taking control of your cloud environments. So in short, Keagan have already shared some really good practices and some good foundations of the different services that AWS provides natively that you can use. CloudQuery can help you scaling those best practices by giving you the visibility and the actionable insights to keep your environment under control. So I will stop here, but happy to answer any questions or go deeper.
Yeah, that's really awesome stuff. I mean, just from the granular level of writing a query yourself to creating a report and then, creating like active reports that run on a scheduled basis are just really great insights. And, on top of that, the fact that it's API based escapes that boundary of, having to run on one application, right? We can integrate it into our existing applications as well, which is super, super cool stuff. A follow-up question I have to you is like, what is the necessary lift of a company or organization that wants to leverage CloudQuery? Like, let's say, whether they have an existing governance application or they don't have any existing governance application, what is the lift once they decide to go forward with CloudQuery? What do they need in order to get started and to be able to run these queries?
So basically, they just need to sync their account. That's pretty much it. And as I mentioned, and I just showed during the demo, we already provide a lot of native stuff out of the box, like the pre-built queries, the report, the policies. So once you connect your AWS environment or the different cloud account that you are using, you can already have some insights that allows you to get started and start taking control of your infrastructure, either like through those out of the box reports, through the policies, or the custom queries I showed you earlier, or even the custom views. So we are also like trying to make it easier and also like reduce the time to value so that like end users can get value out of CloudQuery without spending a lot of time figuring out how it works or trying to deploy stuff or also reduce the learning curve.
I'm not sure if you mentioned this too, but it's read only too. So it's
Yeah.
the goal is to like be a safe place to like democratize this cloud config data. You can go in, you can do queries on it, but you can't like screw anything up in the environments. But it's a good way to like start analyzing that and sharing that data with your development teams.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for the demo. I'm really, really, really interested in like the capability and also the, just the overall visibility that CloudQuery gives. It's awesome.
No, that was really great. We're running out of time here, but if anyone has any last minute questions, let us know in the Q&A. Otherwise, I think we should probably start wrapping it up here. Is there anything else you guys want to touch on before we wrap up?
I think that's for me. Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you. Let's see here. I'm going to post a link here too. If you guys have any feedback about the webinar today, we would love to hear from you. And then also, if you guys want to reach out to Mohammed, showed off our new CloudQuery platform today, and the best way to do that is to have, or like to learn more about it, is to set up a personalized call with it. We'd love to hear what you guys are working on. If you go to our website, you can just go to contact us or go to cloudquery.io/contact us. I'll post a link here in the chat, but we'd love to hear from you as well. Otherwise, how can people connect with you guys if they didn't get enough of you today? LinkedIn, Blue Sky.
Yeah, LinkedIn is great. Just linkedin.com/Mirazee. And then also I'll just drop my email in the chat as well. Like you can feel free to reach out to me there. It's just kmirazee@amazon.com. Happy to connect with anyone there. Just Mirazee on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, I'm happy to have any conversation.
That is perfect. Well, thank you so much, you two, for joining us today. And till next time, let us know if you have any more questions, guys. But you guys are great. That was so fun. And I learned a lot today. And hope everyone that jumped in the stream today did too.
Take care, everyone.